Papa Murphy's $7.99 everyday value lineup of take-and-bake pizzas are, well, a pretty big deal for a pretty small price. We're talking big savings on big flavors, like our new bold shredded pepperoni pizza, crumbled sausage pizza, or classic cheese pizza, all for the small price of $7.99 each. So head to Papa Murphy's, because with freshly made large pizzas at this price, you can afford to bake a big-time deliciousness all day, every day. Papa Murphy's, change the way you pizza.
This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
It's the Papa Murphys of Platteville and Prairie Chien High School football roundup on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. The regular season has wrapped up, and we have postseason football coming up this weekend. I'm joined by Matthew Goninen, Steve Prestegard, Scott Tolzman, and Mark Evenstad. And what a final week it was. We have the conference champions all figured out, and we know what the playoff field looks like. And basically, to summarize, if your team in 11-player football had 3 wins, you made the postseason. So the teams that made it out of the SWC, Prairie Chien, your outright conference champion with a 7-0 conference mark. Lancaster, Platteville, New Glarus, and Richland Center all making the postseason. How about the run by Richland Center to close out the season to sneak their way into postseason play? Out of the SWAL, Cuba City, again, your outright conference champion off that win a couple weeks ago to Darlington. Darlington in second place with a 6-1 conference record. Mineral Point, Belleville, and Southwestern East Dubuque also in the postseason. Southwestern East Dubuque making the postseason for the first time as a co-op. As you might recall, they had a 2-year postseason ban due to an administrative issue with the WIA, but Southwestern East Dubuque makes the playoff field. They will be playing in Division 5. In the 6 Rivers/9 Rivers Conference, Potosi Cassville and Blackhawk Warren, of course, made the postseason. Potosi Cassville, your outright conference champion by way of the win this past Friday night. River Ridge also in. Iowa Grant punches their ticket in, and Seneca Wazeeka Steuben making the field as a 7 seed in Division 6. And, of course, our friends in 8-player football, the Highland Cardinals get a number 1 seed in the 8-player football field, and also, North Crawford out of the Ridge and Valley 8 makes the postseason. They are a 2 seed. So Southwest Wisconsin very much represented in the postseason field across Divisions 4 through 7, as well as our 8-player football teams. But now we get into how the teams were seeded. And boy, oh boy, were there headlines and we'll say discussion that came about once the seeds came out. First, we'll start off with you, Steve Prestegard, because you actually had an article written in the Platteville Journal as kind of a reactionary piece to how the seedings came out, because, not just how the teams were seeded, there was a lot of, I don't know if outrage is necessarily the right word, but when the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association has to release a statement and there is a lot of commotion on social media about it, something didn't necessarily go right from the vantage point of people who actually watch football, especially in this area. So, Steve, how about you lead us into our discussion first, talking about your thoughts and your reaction to how our playoff teams were seeded in Southwest Wisconsin.
Sure. I honestly thought once the seedings came out, remember that the brackets were kind of delayed to be posted on the WI's website. I honestly thought there had been some sort of major computer error and they were going to go through and reseed. That's what they should have done, because bluntly in Division 7, the seedings make no sense in 2 particular cases. You have Potosi Cassville and Ithaca. They won every game this year and they should be number 1 seeds, but they are number 3 seeds. That makes no sense at all by anyone who knows grade school math, basically. So what I did in the journal is I put the teams down. I listed the teams in order of their records, starting with Potosi Cassville, 9-0 and 7-0. Cochran Fountain City, 8-1 and 6-1. By the way, they were a 3-way tie for first place. They didn't win the conference outright. Blackhawk Warren, of course, 6. In fact, Blackhawk Warren and Bangor had the same record, 7-2 and 6-1, second place in their conferences. Then River Ridge, 7-2, 5-2 in the Six Rivers. Cashton, 5-4 and 4-3. They were part of a three-way tie for third in the Scenic Bluffs. Then you have Iowa Grant, 4-5 and 4-3, fourth place in the Six Rivers. And then Seneca Wazeeka Steuben, 4-5 and 3-4 in the Six Rivers. That is how they should be seated. Instead, and nobody, I think, can come up with a really understandable example as to why this is. But you have in Division 7, Potosi-Cassville is third. You have Bangor as number 1. They did not win their conference. I think that's right. They didn't win their conference outright. I'm positive of that. And, you know, you have Blackhawk Warren ranked 6th, and that doesn't make any sense at all. You know, Bangor should have been 4th or 3rd, not number 1. They didn't win their conference, you know, for one thing. And my point is that, you know, the seating computer was created because the WIA got tired, and for understandable reasons, of all of the maneuvering that went on at seating meetings where, you know, coaches would, the more articulate coaches would usually prevail over the less articulate coaches trying to change their seed. Or you would have, you know, well, I think I ought to be a number 3, and all of your conference coach buddies vote for you, unless you're not popular, then they vote against you. Or the other thing of teams maneuvering for seeding to avoid somebody in the first round. But the replacement for that hasn't been, and arguably is worse, frankly, because the purpose of seeding is supposed to be to reward teams for excellence in the regular season. And what was Potosi-Cassville supposed to do to be better? They won every game. Their 2 non-conference games were against teams that made the playoffs. They had 4 wins in addition to the conference season against teams who made the playoffs. How are you supposed to be better than that? And it is just a travesty for them to get a number 3 seed. It's a travesty for Blackhawk Warren to get a number 6 seed. And either they need to change the seeding formula, or they need to just get rid of it and just go back to seeding meetings. They can't be, a seeding meeting would not do a worse job than this seeding process.
It almost.
Oh, go ahead, Scott.
It almost seems, you know, being in the seeding process as a coach before we went to the formula, and I'm going to stick it a little bit with wrestling because track wrestling has the formulas now that seeds kids for regionals. It's almost like they forgot 1 or 2 points for the formula and just decided to go with it and leave it as is. Because like you said, Steve, you know, I can't figure out, and it's not just Division 7. It seems like there's mistakes in each division where conference champions kind of got ripped a little bit with where they're seated.
Yeah, and there's another example, in fact, in Division 6, where you had Cuba City. They went 8-1. They won the SWAL, and yet they are seated below Lancaster, who finished tied for second in the SWC, and added to that, remember Cuba City hammering Lancaster earlier in the season? But Lancaster, if they play again, it's going to be in Lancaster, and for no good reason.
Yeah, the thing that we do know is that in the formula, head-to-head matchups are not part of that equation when it comes to seeding. Part of that, I believe, is due to just an overall strength of schedule and, you know, based on the teams that you do play. The only potential rational explanation that I could think of is that the way the computer system has it set up is that if you play teams in a division higher than what you're currently playing in, so for example, Lancaster playing predominantly Division 5 teams, that has a higher value, and assuming that Division 5 teams are better overall than Division 6 teams. Knowing the landscape of high school football in our area, that is not exactly true. We know that there are Division 7 teams that can definitely take it to Division 5 teams. We've seen that happen. So that's the only justification that I can think of immediately that would lead to something like that. But, in the case that we're talking about with Lancaster and Cuba City, where, again, what does Cuba City need to do differently to be a higher seed than Lancaster besides flat out beating them to begin, the season? I was on the call of that game, and I remember being kind of shell-shocked at the way that game went. And, when there's visual proof of a team being dominant, over another, and then the team that lost ends up being a higher seed, that has to be accounted for in some way, shape, or form. You could make the argument potentially that if, a team had significant injuries and stuff like that, and they got, healthier as the season goes along, and they're playing significantly better heading into the postseason, there might be, some things to discuss there. And I guess the point that I would make with the Division 6 bracket, if Lancaster's number 2, Cuba City needs to be number 1 then. There's no reason that Lancaster should be seated higher than Cuba City from my vantage point. And then, to your point, Steve, about Division 7, none of that makes sense to me whatsoever, the way that came out. I don't know if it's just they, picked up ping pong balls and just kind of decided, this is how, teams are going to be seated. There's no rhyme or reason, one, for the fact that Potosi's, number 3 and Blackhawk Warren is number 6, let alone the fact that they just played a week ago. That's the part that it makes no sense. And for two teams that have played pretty darn well all season long, the fact that one of their seasons will come to an end in level 1 is very disheartening for those football programs. And Scott, I'll ask you this, for coaches like, Mark Siegert and Desi Braden, and for, Guy Kopp, what do you tell your players that, you've played so well throughout the season, and then it comes to a computer to decide what your postseason fate's, going to be as far as what that roadmap is going to look like, and you are, facing off, against some tough competition, and, basically the computer's disrespecting your body of work. How do you articulate that to your players?
Well, in a sense of Potosi and Blackhawk, and that's kind of hard. I mean, it'd be like us that one year where Peck and us came together undefeated the last game, and we could have been facing each other in the following week. But I guess the best way to put it is whatever happened last week, we got to forget. This is a new season. We got to move on and look at the seeds and say, this is our sticking point. We should be higher seed, and we're going to prove people wrong. That's about the best you can. I mean, the one that really, D7, the team that really looks good is River Ridge.
Yeah.
How River Ridge got higher seed than Blackhawk.
Yeah, that's another one.
And River Ridge is in that bracket where, they could come out and be in level 3 or 4.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a realistic scenario. Shark, and then Matthew, your reactions to the brackets and other things that you want to add to the discussion.
Well, Tyler, it was the very fact that at one time, and it wasn't all that long ago, that the playoffs were assigned, especially in basketball, is that they would set up the opponents, and a lot of times at a neutral site, to begin the postseason. And there had been occasion, this is back in the 1990s, you would have, and I'm talking basketball now, Pecatonica and Barneveld would just fight each other tooth and nail in the old Six Rivers Conference, and they would be ranked number 1 and 2 in the state. And they'd get assigned to face each other in the very first round of the basketball playoffs. And you're seeing that very same thing happening right now before our very eyes with Potosi Cassville playing Blackhawk Warren. Those are the two of the best teams in Southwest Wisconsin, if not possibly in all of Division 7 in high school football in Wisconsin. And they get literally assigned to play in the very first round. As you pointed out, Tyler, one of those two teams is going to lose and their season is over. It's just going to go poof in a puff of smoke before they can even get warmed up in the postseason. So I got to believe, and I can't believe that a computer model could come up with this, but apparently it did. And that's where I think the WIAA has to kind of step in and kind of guide things along and say, okay, that's not a matchup that's really intriguing. How about we just mix that up just a little bit and then see if those teams couldn't play maybe in the third round. Heck, they could almost play in level 4, the state semifinal, because those two teams are so good.
I agree. Matthew, your thoughts?
Well, I've got to say, when I was watching the bracket selection show last Saturday, it was, my jaw hit the floor when the Division 7 bracket came on the screen, and I was just shocked. I couldn't believe that the seeds were the way they were. And as it went on, there was a problem with almost every division. And as a fan of the sport, not even as a player, a coach, a parent, anything like that, it's just disappointing. It's disappointing that some of these good teams and these good matchups that we could see later in the season are happening at this point. And I tried to logically think of so many reasons that the teams are seeded the way they are. And I can't come to many, like you said, Tyler, really only one, maybe two ways that you could think, well, maybe that's why this team got seeded there, but it just doesn't make sense. And to me, I understand the fact that you want to try and make things fair, but I'd like to equate this to college football and the idea that computers can't watch football, people watch football. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot to be said about the eye test and how good teams look. And I'd like to think that we have enough good coaches and enough good high school sports media people in this state that we could get a group of people together to put together a bracket. And while there may be problems with that, no bracket will ever be perfect. It's hard for everyone to analyze every play, every stat, every player of every team for a whole season. Obviously, this is not the answer. And I think as the WYAA, their number one priority is to be of service to their member schools and the athletes of those schools. And I'm sure someone and a group of people there, almost everyone there, has to hear the outcry from the fan bases, from the schools, that these are not good brackets. As you mentioned, the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association came out with a statement creating avenues for coaches to express their feelings about the brackets. So thus, considering that's the WYAA's role, I think they need to take action and they need to figure out a way to right this wrong, because it's just disappointing as a fan that this is the way that things are set. And for the teams, it's just their reality. And unfortunately, well, it might not be the best seeds possible. They're just going to have to deal with it because it's what they've been served, but it's still not ideal. It's not right, in my opinion.
Yeah, the thing that I kind of come back to, I'll go ahead, Shark.
Well, the fact is, it's competition. It's high school competition. And, let's face it, it's entertainment. Fans come out to see it. They want to see it. They want to see the best teams face each other for a chance to play for a championship. Now, Scott, you probably heard this because you're a coach, is that when you have those kind of brackets that are put out and you might see some sort of disappointment, coaches will say, well, you gotta play them at some point. You gotta play the best in order to be the best, and you gotta play them at some point. So it might as well be in the first round. Well, no, not necessarily. At least from the standpoint of entertainment, you want those type of matchups to come up when the stakes are really, really high. And in the case of Potosi Castro playing Blackhawk Warren in the first round, the stakes aren't, well, they're not particularly high. It's just that one team is going to lose and the other team is going to win, and they're going to feel pretty good about winning that game, and the other team not going to feel very good at all.
Yeah, I agree there. And also, when you put a lot of heart into that first week, sometimes there's a letdown in the second week and you get beat by a lesser team, and that can happen. Like I said, you guys are making great points. And it's confusing because Potosi, 9-0, conference champ outright, played a couple, they played Cuba City and won. Mm-hmm. How could they still not be number one over a team that's at least got one or two losses?
Yeah, I think the frustrating part is that there is no real transparency as to how this is set up. And part of it is probably by design, because then you will have coaches and programs that will try to manipulate the system so that their team can get a higher seed, and there's a reason that, margin of victory is not, part of the equation, because then you will literally just have teams run it up week after week to, get themselves a better position. And that kind of defeats the whole purpose of, education-based athletics and things like that. But the thing that I kind of immediately jumped to once these brackets came out, and it began with Division 7, started seeing it with Division 6 too, once I saw, where, Cuba City and Lancaster and teams were seated, it felt as though like my intelligence was being insulted as far as, how we've been watching these teams all season long. We cover, most of these teams in our area we've seen, at least once, if not, a couple times over. And, we, check our stats, by doing, this show. It kind of holds us accountable as to, what we're seeing, what teams are supposed to be good and things like that. And then the brackets come out and all of a sudden, none of that even really matters. It just kind of felt like a crapshoot. Yeah, we'll just put a team wherever and, Potosi Cassville, Blackhawk, Warren. Oh, you guys had a conference championship matchup, number 1 versus number 3 by people who, watch football, coach football, human beings that play football, have an investment in high school football in the state of Wisconsin. Oh, well, congratulations on being the number 1 ranked team in the state all season long. Our computer says you're number 3. And then Blackhawk, Warren, you're number 6. Our computer says that you're the sixth best team in your own bracket. That does not make sense to people who watch football. It's insulting, and I really do hope that the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association and the WIA have a very, very spirited conversation, and that changes do come down. I'm all for using the computer for things like determining the playoff field, where you have, X number of, 3-win teams that have to fill out the rest of that 224 playoff field. Because look, if you can't win 4 games in your conference, you shouldn't let it get to a computer anyway to decide, your fate to get into the postseason. But as far as how teams are seeded, the question shouldn't be about whether or not do we want to get the postseason seeds out quickly? Do we want to get it right? And we have to figure out if there's a way that we can just use the computer as a baseline and then have like a human, elements like subcommittee to just kind of take a look at these and adjust accordingly based on head-to-head matchups and the things that actually happen on the football field. 9 weeks worth of football and competition to let it be decided by a computer is not the right way to do it. We saw it with college football with the BCS system. We know how controversial that was. This to me just does not sit right, and I feel awful for the teams that have done everything that they needed to do to be in the best position possible, and a computer system is the thing that kind of brings it down. And for the best way to summarize it, the brackets suck. That's the best way to put it. There's that I guess we'll kind of leave it at that. But again, we have a number of football teams in Southwest Wisconsin in the postseason. We'll talk about the games that we have coming up on Queen Bee Radio. Let's start off with the one that we have on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. We have Westby taking on Lancaster. Shark, you and I will have the call of that matchup. Lancaster coming off a blowout loss to Prairie du Chien 42-7 last Friday night. Oh, by the way, Prairie du Chien, a nugget of information that I discovered after the game finished, Prairie du Chien had a running clock on every SWC opponent this year, if you wanted to see just how dominant they were. But again, Prairie du Chien just dominant over the Arrows, and now they have to quickly turn around. As a 2 seed in Division 6, they welcome in Westby, a 4-5 overall team. They are 3-4 in the Cooley Conference. And Lancaster has a favorable matchup in this Level 1 playoff just based on the record and the way things go. What's the thing you're looking for as we head into the matchup Friday night, Shark?
Well, first off, Lancaster doesn't have to worry about Prairie du Chien anymore, so that's the good news. Yeah. And they start off with an opponent that they're somewhat familiar with. They've faced Westby a number of times in the postseason. In fact, I think the last time they faced Westby won at Lancaster, and that was because Lancaster suffered an injury at the quarterback position midway through the game, and just didn't have the horses for the rest of that game. So a favorable matchup for Lancaster. They're having a good year, and Lancaster looks to amend what they have been doing during the season, and that is they have used multiple offensive formations to utilize the players that they have. They go with the speed game when they need to with Samaje Vinson, but as of late, they've been using the wishbone offense, and that has been very successful for them, carving out the yardage out of that wishbone formation. And Nolan Hankey has he's just been a battering ram ever since that they went to that, and almost unstoppable. But again, they'll use some of the other weapons when they need to, and that adds up to a very dynamic offense for the Lancaster Flying Arrows.
Yep, Scott, you and I were on the call of the game on Friday night, and obviously Blake Thierry was doing Blake Thierry things, 10 attempts for 174 yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 catches for 80 yards, and a touchdown. And, you know, I said during the broadcast, I don't think it's necessarily an indictment on how bad Lancaster played. I thought Prairie du Chien was just that darn good, forcing those turnovers early on, getting great field position, and doing everything that they needed to do. But if you're Coach Rollin talking to your team heading into this matchup on Friday night, what's the thing that you're going to be emphasizing with the team as they get ready for Westby?
Well, you're right about Prairie du Chien. They're just a class above everybody else in the SWC. Yeah, and truthfully, Lancaster, they were driving the ball several times. They shot themselves in the foot and got behind and just kind of snowballed from there the rest of the game. So they've, you could say they had success in the beginning of the game against Prairie by moving the ball. I would say the same thing to the kids. This is a new season. We're down in level 6. We're not playing 5 Division 5 teams. We're playing teams that are going to be comparable to what we're putting on the field talent-wise, and just keep pounding into them as this is a new season, and we'll put everything we got into it.
Yep, again, we have Westby at Lancaster on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. The other matchup that we have in Division 6 on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, Mineral Point at Cuba City. Matthew, you will have the call of that with Scott as well. You got to see the first matchup with me, and you've been seeing Mineral Point obviously throughout the season with MPTV, and it kind of feels like Mineral Point is getting healthier as the season goes along, and they've had a nice run to close out the season, heading into a rivalry matchup with Cuba City the second time over, and you would think that most of the time that the team that loses does have a bit of an advantage because they know the things that they need to do to work on. But what are the things that you're looking for heading into this matchup between Mineral Point and Cuba City Friday night?
It's always going to be an interesting one when you've got two teams that are rivals. They see each other every year, and now the second time this year they're seeing each other. And first for Mineral Point, as you mentioned, they've been building momentum. They started their year 1-3, and since then they're 5-0. And that's what was able to catapult them into the postseason. But I think the big part about it, and one thing that I've talked to Coach Leonard about throughout the weeks and doing some interviews with him, is they're really starting to play complementary football. And the thing is, coming into the season, they didn't really know what their identity was going to be offensively, losing their quarterback, who was the SWAL offensive MVP the year before, losing their running back and losing all four wide receivers. Very tough when you play that spread offense like Mineral Point does. But throughout the year, they started to figure out their identity, figure out their personnel, and the guys have been able to figure out their roles. So I think they're a much improved team from where they were week 4. But going back to the seeding, Cuba City is going to be on a warpath in the postseason. And anybody that's going to run into them round 1, not only with the talent that they have, but with the mindset that I think they're going to be coming into that game in level 1, it's just going to be tough. They haven't really skipped a beat all season. They've been such a good football team, bouncing back from that week 1 loss, able to win the SWAL championship, and anyone that plays them, it's going to be hard. So I look to Cuba City to run the ball well, pass the ball well, and just play a really complete football game. And Mineral Point's just going to have to do all the little things right and hope that they can stay in that one and make it interesting. But it does help that they've played them before.
Yeah, it does help. And then the other thing for Cuba City is that, remember, they didn't have a game last week. So that kind of disrupts, the momentum or the schedule a little bit. I'm sure the practice schedule stayed, relatively the same and everything along those lines. But the fact that they haven't played a game, a week, that rest versus rust, type of mentality, what kind of happens. But like you said, with Cuba City basically being disrespected by the way that they were seated, I think that they have a point to prove, and should be an interesting matchup with Mineral Point coming up on Friday night. That in Division 6. That's the 3-6 matchup. The other matchups in Division 6 in that quadrant of the bracket, number 4 seeded Poynette hosts number 5 Marshall, and number 1 seeded Cambridge hosts number 8 seed Belleville. And of course, we will follow the winner of Cuba City and Mineral Point to level 2, whether that's against Westby or Lancaster, one of our Queen Bee Radio family of stations. Let's move to Division 4, where we have number 6 seeded Platteville traveling to number 3 seeded West Salem. And Steve, we kind of mentioned this in the last couple of weeks that Platteville likely wasn't going to have a home game to begin the postseason, but they have a number 6 seed. They go to West Salem. What do you think the things that Platteville is going to be emphasizing heading into this matchup with West Salem?
Well, I think for one thing, and it's kind of funny that since we spent like 20 minutes ripping the seating, I would say Platteville probably, in this particular case, got a halfway decent seed and maybe a better seed than could have had happened. As it happens, they're going to play a West Salem team that finished in second place, only lost once to La Crosse Aquinas. So it's certainly going to be a challenge that Platteville is. But I think one thing that they have been really good at the last couple of weeks, including in one of their losses, kind of funny this is the case, but they've really got the run game going. And again, that's a funny statement to make for a team that everybody thinks about throwing the ball around as they do. But I really think that they have a home run hitter in the backfield in Tyler Sass. And for one thing, it's you don't look at Tyler Sass as a grinded out running back because he's really not. But it's helpful they have the lead, and you can have somebody that give it to Tyler Sass 10 carries in the on the next scoring drive or something like that. So the rule of underdogs in big games, as you know, is try to score first, try to get the lead, try to make them have to chase you, and try to get them out of their game if that's at all possible. I don't know if West Salem throws the ball very much at all, but if Platteville could get an early lead and then just hand the ball off and let Tyler Sass do his thing, I think they got a decent shot to win that game.
Yep, it'll be Platteville against West Salem on Extreme 1071 and x1071.com. If Platteville wins, they will take on the winner of number 7 seeded Arcadia at number 2 Columbus. The other games in that quadrant of the Division 4 bracket, number 4 Lodi hosts number 5 seeded Wisconsin Dells, and La Crosse Aquinas, the number 1 seed, hosts Edgewood. Now let's go to Division 7, where, again, we have the rematch of the Six Rivers Championship game from last week. Potosi-Cassville hosting Blackhawk Warren. Potosi-Cassville, the 3 seed. Blackhawk Warren, the 6 seed. Matthew, you got to call the game last week with Brad Richardson. Take us through the matchup between the two teams, how Potosi-Cassville got the win and came away with the Six Rivers title.
It was a really interesting game in a lot of different aspects. And I think, first of all, I felt like the whole game, Potosi-Cassville kind of had the slight edge. The home crowd brought it. It was a great atmosphere, the homecoming game in Potosi, senior night for that Potosi-Cassville team. And Blackhawk Warren stayed in that game for a good chunk of that game, up through midway in the third quarter. And they did that because of Owen Sefrud. And they gave him a lot of touches in that game. He had a majority of Blackhawk Warren's offensive yardage in that first half. And they were very disciplined in that first half. They would just simply run the ball down the field and punch it in for 6 on their first few drives. But one thing that I started to see as we got into the end of the second quarter for Potosi-Cassville is their run game had been strong, but then they started to open up the pass game. And then later in the game kind of flip-flopped. The pass game had been so strong, they were able to close it out with their run game. So just that versatility on offense really helped them. They were able to get a couple of stops, intercept Eli Schlem twice, and they were able to come away with the win. So I think that under different circumstances, that game might be played a little differently, but I felt like throughout the whole game, Potosi Cassville just kind of had an edge, and they looked like the better team for a lot of that game.
Okay, so with the rematch coming up on Friday night, which we'll have on ESPN Radio, AM 1590, WPVL, and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, what's the thing that Blackhawk Warren's probably going to be emphasizing heading into the rematch with Potosi Friday?
Well, a couple of things, and one that kind of surprised me is Sefru got significantly less touches in the second half than the first half. And part of that is because the score started to get out of hand. They had to start to pass the ball a little bit more, but they just want to stick to their bread and butter right away. And penalties became a problem in the second half, and not only penalties, but personal foul penalties. They play to the whistle, as Brad mentioned, on a lot of times. So they're just going to need to play a really clean game. And defensively, they're going to need to make sure that they're strong against the number of talented backs that Potosi Cassville has, as well as defending that pass game. And for Potosi Cassville, probably just more of the same, and they'll be just fine.
All right, and then Steve, when you kind of look at the matchup, since you'll be on the call of it, what's the thing that stands out to you immediately with these two teams playing their second game in basically a week?
Yeah, that's one thing. I'm not sure that's ever happened in this area before, where two teams end the regular season against each other and then right away turn around and play. In football, I mean, this has happened
right, yeah.
In other sports, but I don't think it's ever happened in football that I'm aware of at any rate. And, the funny thing about it is that a lot of times the second meeting doesn't really resemble the first. And you can go back a year ago, as a matter of fact. Potosi Cassville beat Blackhawk Warren at Blackhawk for homecoming. Blackhawk Warren made some mistakes. They got to Potosi for the level 3 matchup. They fixed all their mistakes and played a pretty clean game. And really, Potosi Cassville a year ago was never in that game at all, which was crazy if you look at, when they first played. The problem here in this case for Blackhawk Warren is that, for both teams, is there's no time to turn around. You're going to play the team that you just played, and you're going to play them again right away. This is like, the 93 NFL season when the Lions played the Packers for the NFC Central title and then turned around and played the next week, actually 6 days later in the playoffs. That was the Brett Favre bomb pass to Sterling Sharp. Look it up. But, I just think that Blackhawk Warren, if they're going to win, obviously, they need to play more disciplined. If, they're getting 15-yard penalties, you don't win playing,
No.
You don't win playing that way. And they just need to clean up mistakes, basically. And I think, and I may have said this a week ago, if I didn't, I wish I had, that this is one of those games where you want to get the lead. And if you get the lead, then you can pound the football. Obviously, that's what Blackhawk Warren wants to do anytime. But it appeared as though they got into trouble throwing the football, which they had to do because they were behind. And to avoid that, you just get the lead early. I think anybody gets a 2-score lead in this game, it's going to be huge. That's really how I look at it.
And one more thing I'd like to add about that, too, is the first drive for Blackhawk Warren in the third quarter. They took a lot of time off the clock because they were running the ball. But Blackhawk Warren, in the way that they play, they don't feel confident in kicking. They don't go for many PATs or field goals. So they need to finish drives if they get to the red zone. That's something I forgot that happened a lot in the last game, actually. And it's situations like that where if you're not going to finish your drive and get points, that made it easier for Potosi Cassville to turn around and really put that Blackhawk Warren offense in an uncomfortable situation.
Mm-hmm. Especially both teams that are very sound defensively, field position is going to be a key part to that matchup as well. Again, Potosi Cassville, Blackhawk Warren, the rematch on Friday night on ESPN Radio, AM 1590 WPVL, and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. The other matchups in that Division 7 bracket, number 1 seeded Bangor hosts number 8 seeded Iowa Grant, who got in by that win against Riverdale on Friday night. Number 4 seeded Caston hosting River Ridge. That's a very intriguing matchup. And then number 2 seeded Cochrane Fountain City hosting Seneca Wazeeka Steuben. again, as we talked about, during our rants about the brackets, it kind of feels like that, with this bracket, just don't worry about the seeds or anything like that. Just look at the matchups, and, seeds don't necessarily matter. But some intriguing matchups as a result. And again, just a shame that Potosi Cassville and Blackhawk Warren, two of the very best teams in the state going head to head in level one, but should be one heck of a football game on Friday night. Just to spot check the matchups in Division 5, number 1 seeded Prairie du Chien hosts number 8 seeded Southwestern East Dubuque. Again, Southwestern East Dubuque, first postseason appearance as a co-op. And number 4 seeded Racine Lutheran hosts number 5 Brookfield Academy. The number 6 seed New Glarus goes to number 3 seeded Milwaukee Academy of Science. And then Darlington, the number 2 seed, again, for the performance factor, they get bumped up to Division 5. They're a 2 seed, and they host Richland Center. So some very good matchups in Division 5. And then a quick check on the 8-player football bracket as well. Highland is a number 1 seed, and they are hosting, I just had it, and now I lost it. Highland hosts number 4 seeded Oakfield, and then North Crawford, the conference runner-up, gets a 2 seed. They host number 3 Almond Bancroft. So those are the local teams competing in the level 1 postseason for high school football coming up on Friday nights. And again, we'll try and cover as many local teams as we can as the postseason goes along. But our coverage Friday night, again, Westby at Lancaster on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Monroe Point at Cuba City on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Blackhawk Warren at Potosi Cassville on ESPN Radio AM 5090 WPVL on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. And then Platteville at West Salem on Extreme 1071. Shark, go ahead.
I have a question. If Darlington makes it to a state, to the state championship game, win or lose, do they have to move up to Division 4 next year?
The performance is based on the previous 3 years, if I believe. So, however that equates, I would imagine that if they make it there, they probably get bumped up to Division 5 again. But I'm not 100% sure on that, so don't quote me. But yeah, I don't think it's one of those, if you win the D5 championship, you suddenly have to be playing in D4 the next year. That's not the purpose of it. It's supposed to be a culmination of success over a 3-year span. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, that's the layout of our postseason and the teams competing and our coverage. Let's quickly go to our team or teams of the week. Does anyone have a team not named Potosi Cassville as our team of the week this week?
I have to admit, after watching Prairie du Chien for the first time against Lancaster, Prairie du Chien looked great. I mean, they were good on offense, defense, and special teams. And when you got all three working for you, it's going to be tough to beat you.
Yeah, the style of play of Prairie du Chien feels very similar to what we've been seeing from Cuba City pretty consistently throughout the year as well. They're just so well-rounded in all three phases of the game. Granted, Cuba City did lose to Potosi Cassville to begin the season, so the records aren't the same, but the style of play and just the aggressiveness that they have. But when you've got a player like Blake Thierry, who, again, the stat lines reflect that, but Prairie du Chien as a team is very rock solid. There's a lot of other great players that certainly help make Prairie du Chien successful. So yeah, I would co-sign Prairie du Chien as our team of the week as well, not just for the win, but for their body of work. Again, when you get a running clock on the entire SWC, that's a pretty big statement. So, great dominance by Prairie du Chien. Again, the only two games where there wasn't a running clock was the loss to Aquinas 14-12, and then a 35-7 win over Darlington, the number 2 seed in that bracket. So, again, that just speaks to the dominance of Prairie du Chien this season. Our players of the week, Steve, do you have a player of the week that you'd like to submit?
I do. The freshman quarterback from Iowa Grant, Hayden Altman, who had 2 touchdown runs and a touchdown pass. He has actually played a fair amount. Not the starter, though. Brock Hinterman is the starter, but he's been dealing with a knee injury and a shoulder injury, and they decided to hold him out. And Altman did a good job of getting things running smoothly and all that. He did have one turnover in the game, but other than that, played pretty well and got the win for Iowa Grant to get in the playoffs. The point to be made about that is that last year they got 3 wins and did not get into the playoffs. So they did not want to risk that happening again. It seems as though they would have got in anyway, but they did not want to risk that. And so they played well. Altman played quite well, and they got in the playoffs.
All right. Shark, your player of the week.
I'm going to go with Myron Tranel of Platteville. Boy, what a game he had last week against Dodgeville. Caught a couple of touchdown passes, and he ran an interception back, 85 yards for a touchdown in Platteville's 48-7 win over Dodgeville, a game that the Platteville Hillman controlled right from start to finish. We had a running clock, and Platteville looked really good in their final game of the season. So, hopefully that set them up to play well against West Salem. And thanks to Myron Tranel and the great game that he had last week for the Hillman.
Can I correct one thing quick? It's Myron Ryder, number 1.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can understand how you confused him because we both know Myron Tranel. He would be really shocked to know that he played on Friday.
Yeah, yes, he would. Yes. Well, my bad. My bad.
All good. Scott, your player of the week.
I'm going to go with Blake Theory. That first touchdown he got after Lancaster fumbled the ball, it was a 42-yard scamper. It was almost like nobody touched him. He went through that line, and in the end zone he went. He ran the ball well. He caught the ball. He got a couple touchdowns, but I was impressed with the way he played defense. And I came home that night, and I started going on Wisconsin Sports Network to see if his name is still on any of the awards list semifinals, and it's hard to believe he's not.
Really?
Here's a kid that's already going to play football in Division I, and I did not see him on any of the semifinal lists.
I thought he was on the Altoon one, if I remember right. But I could be wrong on that. Yeah.
He was on the beginning, but he didn't make the semifinals.
Yeah. Well, he should be recognized because not only was it, him running the ball and playing that great defense, he also had a 57-yard punt. So he was getting it done in all 3 phases of the game. He's also the long snapper for Prairie du Chien as well. So, he is. He's not afraid to get it done in multiple ways at multiple positions for Prairie du Chien. Matthew, your player of the week.
I'm also going to go with Blake Theory, very talented athlete, incredible season for him, incredible performance in the final game. And I'll also throw out a little shout out to Reed Ackerman for Mineral Point. Had 3 rushing touchdowns this week against Fenimore and kind of helped Mineral Point get back in that game. And kind of like Thierry, just the way he's able to play so many different positions, kind of an interesting spot for him on the program. Quarterback, running back, defensive end, and punter, the first team all-SWAL punter selection for this year.
I like it. Those are our players of the week, and now it's time for Steve's High Five, where Steve kindly ranks our teams area 1 through 5, and the rest of us tell him why he is wrong. Steve, some of our teams went head-to-head last week. What does the High Five look like to finish out the regular season?
Blackhawk Warren ends up 5th after their loss. Darlington ends up 4th. Cuba City ends up 3rd. Wasn't their fault. They couldn't find anybody to play. Prairie du Chien is ranked 2nd, and the 3rd seed, but number 1 ranked, and the winner of the Steve's High Five number 1 for the regular season, Potosi Cassville.
Are you sure that computer's right?
This computer? Well, that's debatable, I suppose. But
like the WIA, there's no transparency in the way that Steve ranks these. So
no, there also isn't any consistency necessarily from 1 week to another. Ooh, I shouldn't have said that, but But Potosi Cassville has not done anything to not be number 1. They're the only undefeated team, and they did not play a patsy schedule or anything like that. So that's why they're number 1.
All right. Any other objections or any thoughts on Steve's High Five while we have a chance? Because I don't know if the High Five is going to continue into the postseason, as teams will be eliminated as the postseason goes along. So this might be your last parting shot to say something mean to Steve Prestegard about the way he thinks about our area teams.
Well,
Speak now or wait till next season.
Yeah, I'm going to throw Highland in there though too. I mean, Highland Now, granted, it's 8-man football, but you know what? It's football. It's still played the same way, and they are 8-0 in conference champs. So.
Yeah, and they looked pretty dominant doing so as well. I know that we want to give Highland their kudos, and yeah, they're poised for a deep postseason run, and probably one of, if not the favorites, to bring home the 8-player state championship. So that is Steve's high five, and now let's talk about the Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien 2024 Football Mascot Challenge. We are now down to the championship, and again, the Cassville faithful have strongly influenced the way that the tournament played out. The Cassville Comets overwhelmingly defeated the Montfort Hilltoppers, and they also voted the Bagley Indians into the championship round. And again, it's not just Cassville, but a lot of votes came from Cassville. There were people that were just basically sitting on their phones just voting hours on end for this contest because, truth be told, I think 10 family-sized pizzas might feed the entire school district of Cassville. I think they only have an enrollment of like 47 or something like that. So yeah, those that small but mighty school in Cassville definitely voting and influencing the way that the mascot challenge plays out. But again, the Cassville Comets, not a bad mascot name by any stretch. It's still a mascot that's currently used by their main teams as far as basketball and stuff like that. But for the co-op for Potosi Cassville, obviously there is no mascot associated with them. But now that it's down,
there may be by Friday. We may have to find out one before Friday.
Yep. So with that in mind, Cassville Comets versus Bagley Indians, is there one that any of you are kind of leaning towards as your not just your favorite to win, but the one that you might be rooting for to bring home our Mascot Challenge championship?
Well, we did have a comic go by a couple of weeks ago, right? So that maybe it's a sign from above or something like that. But you said that the 10 family-sized pizzas might feed the Cassville school. Might it not also feed the entire village of Bagley, Tyler?
The way my kids eat, maybe. Yep, that too. Yeah, Matthew, your thoughts on the finals here?
It's been a great mascot challenge. I can't believe we're already to the end. And you're right. The people have done their job. We've got some pretty good mascots in the end. I'm glad it's not too boring mascots and it's like, oh, all that for nothing. But I think I'm gonna have to root for Cassville in this one. I know a couple of Comet faithful, so I'm gonna have to pledge my support. And also, green, it's a pretty cool color. You don't see that too often in sports teams. So we're going for them.
So after, when we announce the winner next week, are we going to play One Shining Moment?
For trademark purposes, I don't know if we can, but if you want to do an acoustic version, by all means, feel free to do so.
Get a highlight reel of the Cassville people voting all day, every day.
Like sitting there on the phone. Yeah,
definitely. Yep. Scott, you were talking about some of the unique ones and the ones that you were kind of rooting for. We do have a couple unique ones still in play for the finals, but I think the most unique is the Comets, just because that's not a common one that we see around here.
No, I agree. I mean, if I'm going to vote, which I was one of those that one day I was bored, so I voted maybe about 10 or 12 times. But mine didn't win, so Comets, yeah. And I'll go with the Comets, even though I was a Belmont coach for many years. I'll support the old Six Rivers.
I like it. Yep. Shark, your thoughts on it?
Well, yeah, the Cassville Comets. Hey, this harkens back to the days of 1993 when the Cassville Comets took on Thorpe in the Division 6 state championship game, only to fall in that game. But the Cassville Comets certainly have championship blood. And of course, who can forget those 3 great years with Chad Infield and Scott Uppana and Sam Oakey when they ruled high school basketball with all those state championships. And let's not forget the late 90s under with Coach Uppana leading the charges with Andy Hulse outstanding athlete, both for football and basketball. So yeah, the Cassville Comets do have that championship blood, and so in their minds, or at least as kind of as a salute to them, why not see them in this matchup to win the mascot challenge?
Well, we'll see how the outcome plays out. Again, it's the Cassville Comets versus the Bagley Indians. You can vote on any of our Queen Bee Radio websites, WGLR.com, SuperHits106.com, X1071.com, and AM1590WPVL.com. Just look under the contest tab, look for the mascot challenge, and vote there. And, hopefully once all this is said and done, if it is Cassville that does, turn out the vote again and pull this thing out, I hope that, their thumbs can rest and ice up and, we can move on with this challenge once it's completed. So yeah, we'll see what the final outcome is. Again, voting is open now, and voting will end at 7 p.m. on Tuesday evening. So they have until the 29th to get everything in, and we will determine who gets the 10 family-sized pizzas, courtesy of Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien. Again, it would be Cassville or River Ridge that would be receiving them, as the Bagley Indians would be affiliated with the River Ridge School District. So that wraps up the mascot challenge, and that wraps up this week's episode of the high school football roundup. Again, our coverage on Queen Bee Radio on Friday night, 4 games across all 4 stations, including 3 YouTube streams. Subscribe to the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel so you can get notifications of the games that we have. We'll also have more Subs.com highlight reels and other content on our Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel throughout the postseason. High school volleyball also going on, the regional round. Everyone's vocal cords should hopefully survive through Saturday night, and everyone should be back for the high school football roundup next week on Thursday. For Matthew Goninen and Steve Prestegard, Scott Tolzman, and Mark Evenstad, I'm Tyler Diktanas. Thanks so much for joining us, and we will get you next week for the high school football roundup, brought to you by Papa Murphy's of Platteville and Prairie du Chien.